Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Last week was Richard Dean Anderson's 70th birthday. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a huge Stargate fan, so it might as well be another holiday for me. Happy birthday, Richard Dean Anderson. Also, we had Star Trek Picard come out. I won't be talking about that just yet, though. I'm going to give folks some time to get to watching it, and when we do get around to talking about it in a future episode, I will make sure I give you guys a warning first so that you can skip ahead 10 seconds or so. 10 minutes, really, to get to the next segment. So, right now, today, we are going to be talking about October Faction, Sanctuary, Amanda Tapping, some composers, and the Groundhog Day trope. Now, those might seem like they don't have anything in common, but I assure you they do. Folks who have worked on Stargate have worked on all of those. So in celebration of Richard's birthday, we're going to be going over some of those things. We're going to start with October Faction. I'm going to not give you guys any spoilers. We'll just be talking about the different things that are going on kind of with the characters from a high-level aspect. So we're not going to delve into the plot or anything like that, so I don't spoil anything for you guys. But October Faction is a show that has recently aired on Netflix, and it's directed by Damien Kindler. I was watching it the other night, and as soon as I saw Damien's name, I got very excited. I wasn't sure how I felt about the show at first because, you're only one episode in. You have to give it several episodes to figure that out. But I saw Damien's name, I'm like, oh yes, this is going to go in an excellent direction. And that is because he has also been involved with Stargate and with Sanctuary. Damien has made a lot of really awesome sci-fi over the years, so I'm excited to see what he does with this. We also have some awesome actors on the show. So J.C. McKenzie, you might remember him as Dr. Spivak from Hemlock Grove. If you watched Hemlock Grove, that one was Famke Janssen and Bill Skarsgård, and they had all of the vampire stuff, but they called them Upirs for that series, and it was very entrenched with like the Ouroboros symbology and all that jazz. It was interesting. I would give it a shot if you're into monster stuff. It's more about vampires and werewolves for the most part. But there's also some scientific experimentation in that one too. Tamara Taylor is also in October Faction. I loved her as Dr. Camille Soroyan on Bones. I know Bones isn't sci-fi, but I majored in biological anthropology, so, we used to watch Bones in grad school and, make a game out of it whenever they got something wrong. It was a lot of fun for us because we really like the character interactions. So if you like character-driven shows, then Bones could also be for you. Camille Soroyan was Tamara Taylor's character in the show. She's a very smart woman of color. I loved it. She was a boss in that show, and Tamara is pretty much a boss in everything she's in. She also plays Prescott in Altered Carbon. She did the voice of Wonder Woman for Justice League Gods and Monsters. So she has done quite a few things in regards to being a BA woman. She was the teacher in Serenity too. So whenever River's having those flashbacks to having, being taught at the beginning, and, she's seeing these flashes of Reavers and stuff too. The teacher that's teaching them is Dr. Soroyan, aka Tamara Taylor. That is her actual name. I just really loved her and was with her for so long when watching Bones that Soroyan is the character I most identify her with. But Tamara Taylor is a fantastic actress, and in this show, she and J.C. McKenzie play a husband and wife team who hunt monsters. Now, the monster hunting isn't really the primary focus of the show. There's a lot of that going on, but very similar to Santa Clarita Diet, it's also focusing on the family relationships. Although in Santa Clarita Diet, it's a very close-knit, loving family, and in this case, the parents are trying to protect the children from knowledge, so they aren't really sharing in it the same way the characters in Santa Clarita Diet do that. But the show is very much about family and about returning to your roots. So this is not a spoiler. The first 5 minutes of the show, it is revealed that J.C. McKenzie's dad has died far away in this old town that he used to grow up in, that he and Tamara Taylor's character both grew up in, and they have to return back to that town. And his dad had lived in a mansion that J.C. McKenzie's character grew up in, and they end up having to go back for the wake. So they're seeing a lot of old friends and old acquaintances as they go along. So that's really interesting, watching their personal lives unfold as well, because I feel like we don't get that a lot in a lot of sci-fi and a lot of procedural dramas as well. We focus on their work and don't get to see them much outside of those settings. I think JAG is one of the big exceptions to that, but even its spinoff NCIS doesn't focus as much on the inner lives of these people, really. Stargate didn't really focus on that at all. The one time we got to see Daniel at home or Sam at home tended to be when there was a crisis, like when the alien Orlin was visiting, or when Daniel was about to lose it and jump off of the balcony of his apartment because he had been exposed to the light on the other planet and was going through some withdrawals. So for the most part, in a lot of sci-fi, at least the ones that I've watched, we don't get to see their personal lives a lot. That is why I like how Star Trek does some character-focused episodes as well. But October Faction gets really into the background of that, and I enjoy it. So if you like that kind of thing, then you may enjoy this as well. There's also a lot of diversity in the show. You can tell that they're trying to really follow the principles of sci-fi and really representing people on screen that are in the real world around us, and I think that that's awesome. That means we also get to see a lot of nuances in these characters that we don't typically get to see on television. So navigating being gay as a person of color, particularly a teenager, because Tamara Taylor and J.C. McKenzie's kids on the show are 17-year-old twins named Viv and Jeff. So we get to see a lot of what's going on with them. The children are so bright and speak multiple languages. I really enjoy the scenes where they're speaking to each other in different languages, and so you have to read the subtitles at the bottom of the screen. And it's because they've moved around a lot, so it makes sense as to why these kids, can already speak all these languages. It isn't one of those just Mary Sue kind of things. These kids have worked hard to fit in everywhere that they've moved, particularly Jeff. Jeff thrives on, meeting new people and climbing the social hierarchies in every place that they go to. Whereas Viv, who is one of my favorite characters so far, she is really representative of how the brightest among us often don't fit in. So while Jeff is really outgoing and he's smart in his own right socially and with speaking multiple languages, he's also really fast with his quizzes. He's really smart, and they indicate that, but they don't focus on that with Jeff as much as they do with Viv, where her parents are like, we know that you're smart. We know you're a straight A student, but you need to work on getting along with other people. That is your goal for this next place that we move to. And I really enjoy that because being a genius is usually celebrated a lot in film, but here it shows some of the bummers of being incredibly smart, but having difficulties connecting to people. I think that a lot of us can identify with that, and I really enjoy that they're showing it through a girl, and particularly a woman of color. She's a young woman, I should say. So she's not really a girl. She's 17. So she's a young woman of color. And it's really interesting for me, and I identify a lot with Viv in being very awkward. No knowledge in the world is going to help you not be awkward per se. That's just experience in social skills, and that is why they are helping push Viv, really, even when she doesn't want to be more sociable. I get that, and it's difficult. A lot of us know that we're awkward, but we can't change it with the knowledge that we have, which can be very frustrating because we can do a lot of things with knowledge, except frequently solve our own problems. Of course, there are also monsters on this show. As I said, it's not a huge focus, but they do some really interesting things with the different monsters on there. It's not just what you typically see in vampires and such. They go out and really try to make it their own, and I like how they do that in the show. So if you are interested in monster hunting shows, then you might really like this. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Sanctuary.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the new show October Faction, how it's by Damian Kindler, some shows that J.C. McKenzie and Tamara Taylor have helmed before, the diversity, and how they're really representing a lot of the things that we struggle with and we strive for as nerds and geeks, and how, these characters are navigating that world around them as 17-year-old kids whose parents hunt monsters. And of course, there are also the monsters. Now, as I said before, this show is by Damian Kindler, and so is Sanctuary. So a lot of you may have heard of Sanctuary. It was on SciFi several years back, started as a web series, and then really made it onto the networks here. It was very exciting. I enjoyed Sanctuary. A lot of the show, like 90% of the show, was green screens, which was a newish technology at that time. So it was kind of a big deal for them to show so much of the story through green screen representation. The library, the office, everything in that giant building were green screens. It was amazing to see it filmed behind the scenes. I didn't get to be there personally, but, I've watched a lot of footage on YouTube. So with Sanctuary, it's similar to October Faction in that those people are also hunting these creatures, but they're not out to kill them in Sanctuary. Their motto is Sanctuary for All. So they're trying to find these creatures and prevent them from hurting people, but also protecting the creatures from humans who would harm them. Kind of like the people in October Faction. Although October Faction, our main characters aren't actually evil, but they are very similar to the antagonist of Heroes, Claire's dad and all that, working for the paper company, out there hunting these monsters. And I'm putting monsters in quotation marks. You can't see me do the air quotes, but they're there. So in Sanctuary, you have some characters who were noted throughout history, like Jack the Ripper and a bunch of other really interesting characters. And you get to see them throughout time, but also they created this elixir and they took it. And so they are functionally more or less immortal. And they are out there. Some of them are good. Some of them are bad, the 4 of them. And they are trying to work with and against each other to help these monsters or just to pursue their own means. And it's really interesting to me to see how Jack the Ripper is portrayed as this person who was once very loving, and it just went wrong for him when he took the elixir that made everyone functionally immortal. The others were still fine, but it just totally twisted John until he was this almost unrecognizable person to his friends. He still looks the same, more or less, but he is just twisted on the inside, and he fights who he is as a person. So it's a very different take on Jack the Ripper. If you like historical sci-fi, then you might really enjoy this. Damien also did some work on Stargate and Stargate Atlantis as a writer and as a director. So I really was interested to see what he did with Sanctuary and what he did with October Faction. So one of the things that I look for when exploring new sci-fi is whether I recognize any of the directors or the writers' names. Because for me, it's not just about how things are coming across on screen with the actors, but also I think it kind of informs me as to how the series might go. Granted, if you have different directors working with different writers and different producers, things can definitely be very different between shows. And especially, you don't know how these people work together behind the scenes. But I also like to think that, these people are bringing a part of who they are into these stories. And if I've liked their stories in the past, then there is a strong possibility that I will like their stories in the future. So I will give something a shot longer than I normally would if I recognize like Martin Wood's name or Damian Kindler, Amanda Tapping, names like that, who I know I've loved their work in the past. And I'm like, okay, well maybe this is just a slow start. I always give books that I'm reading a few chapters in before I will decide that I don't like it. Granted, I finish books I don't like just to stick it to myself really and teach myself a lesson, because not all things that are good are necessarily enjoyable. But how can we discuss these things if we don't even bother to finish them? Maybe we're missing the lessons by not sticking around long enough. So this is my personal approach to it. And that's one reason why I was really excited to see Damien's name in October Faction. Sanctuary is really interesting. It follows mainly Helen, who is functionally immortal. That's Helen's kind of thing, is, the guy's got other gifts, but Helen mostly received immortality. And she's played by Amanda Tapping, and she's the one with this really big heart who has started this sanctuary for all. But the sanctuary can also be a very dangerous place. Not all of the creatures are truly safe to be around. They are behind glass, a lot of them. So Helen is kind of keeping them in a zoo. But the way that she sees it is that it is safer for them and for everyone else. So for her, it's the greatest good for the greatest amount of creatures, even if she is technically keeping these creatures in captivity. So I have feelings both ways on it, but I also understand where Helen's coming from on it. It's not like she's actively trying to create a zoo for profit. No one is really allowed in the sanctuary except for people who are similar to them or who are working with them. But, she's still kind of keeping them captive. I guess it's better than killing them, but, to what end? Like, if these creatures live for a long time, is, lifelong incarceration really worse than death? I think that's an individual question that each of us would have to ponder. We can't really ask the monsters, but I'm sure that all of us have our own opinions about that. And if you would like to share those with me, I would love for you guys to go to @GSMC_sci-fi on Twitter and let me know. Now, with Sanctuary, I also really love that they have several non-human characters who are good guys working with them. There is a Bigfoot type creature, and I love him. He's a gentle giant. And there's also someone who is a werewolf, and Helen helps him kind of keep that in check. So it's very cool. Think X-Men kind of, those kids are there to be helped and to be taught, but a lot of these creatures in Sanctuary can't really be taught or communicated with in a lot of ways because, they're reptilian based and they don't have the same languages or the same, brain processing that some of the other creatures like the mermaids and such have. I think that there is a strong anthropomorphic component in there, but Sanctuary tries to do a really good job in addressing that as well and in not viewing them as monsters just because they are carnivorous towards humans and such. So I like how they use language in that show a lot, and I really love how Amanda Tapping carries through as the leader in that show. And it's also about her relationship with her daughter Ashley, who is also an awesome BA woman, but, Ashley's got an attitude and a chip on her shoulder, and it makes sense as you go along and figure out more about who Ashley is and what that means for her. I think that they did a fantastic job. It's one of my favorites to watch, and if you loved Stargate or Stargate Atlantis or any of the works by Amanda Tapping, then you may enjoy Sanctuary, and you should give it a shot. We're going to go on another break real quick, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Amanda Tapping.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the TV show Sanctuary, how Damian Kindler worked on it, and Amanda Tapping, how it was largely green screens. It was really breakthrough for its time, and how they got through a lot of those challenges with green screens. I think it was a fantastic show. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about Amanda Tapping, though. Amanda Tapping is one of my favorite actresses and directors. She was on the X-Files at one point. She didn't have a lot of lines in that one, but you may remember there's an episode where Skinner goes on a date, and on the date, somehow the woman ends up dead, and that woman is Amanda Tapping. So she got to work with Mitch Pileggi on that. And then years later on Stargate, they had a reunion in which he was a guest star on the show as the recurring character Colonel Caldwell. So I thought that was really cool. When I saw Skinner pop up on Stargate, that was a lot of fun for me the first time and every time. Caldwell is kind of tough, and I really enjoyed getting to see, this military side of Mitch Pileggi's acting. He was government for the X-Files, so this is still different. But I really enjoyed seeing him on the show. And just getting to see that little reunion. That's part of the fun of sci-fi and speculative fiction shows in general, I think, is getting to see, your favorite actors working in these same circles and, seeing Marina Sirtis on Stargate as a Russian astrophysicist. That's a lot, I don't know, that's a lot of fun for me. I don't know how much you guys enjoy it, but that's one of my favorites, is to see them pop up. So, on Stargate, Amanda Tapping played Samantha Carter, who was a brilliant astrophysicist. She was also in the military. So I really enjoyed that character in that Sam kind of straddles the line between military and scientist. So she's somewhere between Jack and Daniel. She still has a lot of Daniel's heart in some ways, but she's also a scientist. And Jack has to call her out at one point for, being fascinated that she's about to see some of her coworkers spaghettify as they are sucked into a black hole. And he's like, hey, those are people. Those are our friends. You need to chill out. And that's early on. It's like season 1, I believe. But Sam, also agrees with Jack on a lot of things too, because she understands the military perspective. So sometimes she sides more with Daniel, sometimes more with Jack, but as Jack's second in command, she's still going to follow Jack's orders. And I love seeing how Amanda Tapping navigated that. There are a couple of interviews with her, including a lot of Comic-Con stuff. I follow her Comic-Con videos on YouTube. And she talks about how when she first started the show, she was really excited because she'd had smaller parts for the most part before that, but she'd always carefully selected her roles and played strong women, and that was not something she really wanted to compromise on. So she was very excited to play Sam because Sam's a very strong female character, and she goes to do, their test run for their outfits, and they bring her like this low-cut tank top and all this other stuff. And she said that she just burst into tears and was like, I can't do that. I can't play the TNA version of Samantha Carter. Tell them, I'm sorry, they can recast it if they need to, but I cannot do that. And so the costume designer went to the directors and stuff and was like, hey, we have a problem. This is what's going on. And they're like, hey, it's not a problem. Tell her, go pick out something else that she's more comfortable wearing, and, we'll go from there. And so the costume designer comes back and kind of surprises Amanda by saying that they're going to make a change, and she is asked what she would really rather be wearing, and she's like, well, what are the men wearing? And so that's why we really get Sam wearing, crew neck shirts. Even when she wears the tank tops, they're not low cut. She made great strides, I think, for women in sci-fi, and there are many reasons why we refer to her as the Grand Empress of sci-fi. She's very inspirational to me as a woman. She's also very funny. Amanda inspires me with her kindness and her humor, even when people are being degrading to her on set, as they have at times. She will fire back at them with humor, and it just totally blows them sideways. And I think that that's hilarious. There's nothing funnier. Well, there are a couple things funnier maybe, but I enjoy catching people off guard with humor when they're trying to be jerks. So I liked watching her get one over on other people as well. Now, you may also recognize Amanda Tapping from Supernatural. She's directed several episodes, but she also played the angel Naomi. Now, Naomi, I get, was, kind of a bad guy, but I really enjoy getting to see her step into all of these different roles. She's also played a doctor on Killjoys, and she plays a therapist on Travelers, which is directed by and created by Brad Wright, who also did the Stargate television series with Amanda Tapping. So it's nice to see those little reunions along the way. I love how over the years, she's really flourished as a director, and now she really has her own signature style, and it's at the point where if I'm watching sci-fi, I could be watching Travelers or, Dark Matter, any of those, and I can look at a scene and go, oh, that's an Amanda Tapping scene. She has her own signature style at this point. She's a fan of like overhead shots and these really interesting perspectives for the fight scenes. You can tell that she thinks very visually, and that really helps her as a director. But I think that also having been an actor for so long and having directed herself in some acting scenarios has helped her get a really interesting and different perspective on it than a lot of other directors. I can also recognize a Martin Wood scene when I see it because I watch so much Stargate and really pay attention when the directors' names pop up on the screen and all that jazz. But I really, really love Amanda's work. I love the overhead shots. She does the warehouse fight in Travelers. She also does the prison cubicle scene in Dark Matter. I love it. So good. And now I think a lot of times when sci-fi shows need someone to come in and direct, some really cool fight scenes, they call Amanda. And that's amazing, not just because she's amazing in and of herself and she has done a lot of really awesome work and paved this way for herself, but also because Amanda's just cool. You guys, anyone that you ask about how it is working with her, they absolutely love her, and they all say that she brings a lot of joy and levity to the set, even as she brings that professionalism. And there are so few female directors who really get a shot that it's really cool seeing her and Sally Richardson Whitfield going out there and just crushing it, particularly in sci-fi. Sally was also on Stargate, and she played Teal'c's wife at one point, and she was also in Eureka. I believe she played Allison, and now she does a lot of directing. So both of these women really inspire me, and I think that they are awesome. If you haven't checked out Travelers, or I'm sure most of us have seen Supernatural at this point, and if you haven't, you are very far behind. You're going to be binging for like a year at this point. Killjoys, I haven't really seen that one. I watched Amanda's scene, but I haven't tried Killjoys. It's on my to-do list. There's so much sci-fi now, which is really exciting, that there's a lot to choose from. But now I'm like running out of room to really sit here and watch all of it. But Amanda has also done, Siren. So there's a relatively new TV show, Siren, that came out. She directed an episode of The 100. She's doing Anne with an E as well. Now that's not sci-fi. It's like Anne of Green Gables. So I have not watched that one yet, but she says that she really enjoys it, and that one's close to her heart. So if you like Amanda Tapping a lot, maybe you and I can sit down one day and we will watch Anne with an E just because of Amanda. At the very least, we can watch her 4 episodes. She's also done X Company. She directed some episodes of Van Helsing. I don't really love Van Helsing as I don't love the plot of it, but I do love it visually. I love Amanda's episodes as well. So I'll still watch Van Helsing just for her episodes. But she did all of those in 2016, so she hasn't done any new ones. Dark Matter, she did episode 1.4, and also Welcome to Your New Home. So the prison one. She did such an amazing job, and she directed Remedial Battle Magic on The Magicians, and I love that episode. Remedial Battle Magic is just a lot of fun in general, even without Amanda directing it. I love that show, but her directing it really made it for me. She also directed Continuum. I had trouble getting into Continuum, so I haven't really seen all of her episodes for that, but I think I'm just going to go through and watch her individual episodes. Or, sometimes I actually go back through TV shows and sci-fi, and I will try to watch it again after time goes by. I didn't like Rick and Morty the first time I started watching it, and then I came back to it a couple months later in a different mind frame, and I totally loved it. I've seen Rick and Morty so many times now. Same thing with BoJack Horseman, which isn't sci-fi, but, it's weird. There's animals who are anthropomorphic and everything. So, just sometimes things don't click with us the first time, and you can go back and give it another shot. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some composers.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the Grand Empress of sci-fi, Amanda Tapping. Now we're going to talk about some of my favorite composers. A lot of these composers have really formed the soundtracks to many of our lives. We all recognize the Jaws theme music, the Star Wars theme music. John Williams just won some more awards for his work with making the music for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge down in Florida. He also won another Grammy, I believe, for his scores on the most recent Star Wars films. So he's maintaining his crazy, huge collection of Grammys and, his record setting with all of this work that he's done over the years. I feel that John Williams is one of our most iconic composers, and I really appreciated when I was a kid, my music teacher, Miss Young, would have us sit there and listen to symphonic music or orchestral music and really pick out the different instruments that were in it. So we would sit there on the floor, this is like 3rd grade, and she would also give us crayons and paper, and she's like, draw it with the color that you feel this is representing, and, if you feel that it's really sharp music, go ahead and, scribble hard with it. And if you feel like it's light and airy, do whatever you feel represents that on your paper. And we would also pick out the different instruments like violins and violas and cellos, so we could tell the difference between all of the different members of the string family and also, woodwind, etc., all of the different families in music by listening to it. And a lot of times she would pick not just like Beethoven or Bach, but she would pick some sci-fi music. She did a lot of John Williams, and she knew that whenever she played that I would know what it was. And she would be like, Alexandria, what is that? And I'm like, that's John Williams. This is from Star Wars. This is this song. And, I was a big music nerd at the time, but I was also a big Star Wars geek. And my kind of Venn diagram of those two things is where John Williams and Joel Goldsmith and Jerry Goldsmith and Danny Elfman live in my little world. So if you also love them, I thought we could talk about them a little bit today and their contributions to the soundtracks of our lives. One of the first ones I want to talk about after John Williams, since we've already talked about him, is Joel Goldsmith. So he has composed music for film, television, and video games. So no matter what your preferred medium of consuming sci-fi is, as long as it's accompanied by music, so not comic books, then Joel Goldsmith probably had a big hand in what you were getting to listen to. He made a lot of music for Stargate. The main title for Stargate was written by David Arnold, who also composed the score to Stargate, and the movie that began the Stargate franchise. So he did the music for Stargate SG-1 and the original movie. But Joel Goldsmith really did all the rest of it. So Joel wrote Sam and Jack's theme, and I know I'm a shipper. Not all of us are, but even if you aren't a shipper, they do a really good job in Stargate of going through and really illustrating what's happening in the show with the music instead of exposition. It's very much a show don't tell kind of method, which I love in any type of storytelling, but particularly in sci-fi. And in this case, there is one scene where way later on, they've established, Sam and Jack kind of have a thing for each other, but they can't act on it because they're in the military. And Jack he's dying, really. And the only way to save him is to get a Gould symbiote. Really, it's a Tok'ra, but for Jack, there's no difference between the two because he has his own biases for it. And Sam is in a hazmat suit and she's like, this is your option. And he was like, over my dead body. And he's super weak and can barely function, but he's like, no, that's not happening. And then she's like, please. And that's all she really says, but it starts playing Sam and Jack's theme music a little bit in the background, and he agrees to it. So a lot of people have argued over the years as to why Jack agreed to do this. But in the end, I don't think it's really for the greater good at that point. The Tok'ra could put that symbiote into any human being to get the information that the Tok'ra Kanan had gotten on his undercover mission. They don't need Jack for it per se. And Joel Goldsmith's composition of Sam and Jack's theme is so simple and light, but it also carries a lot of emotion in it. And I love how they use that in the show to really tell you why the characters are doing what they're doing. The use of music in Stargate is phenomenal, and I really love Joel's work in it. Over the years, Joel did Call of Duty 3 as well. That was in 2006 and was his first real foray into video game music. Over the years, he has also worked on Star Trek First Contact with his father, Jerry Goldsmith. He did a lot of music for Diagnosis Murder, which I absolutely loved. I know it's not sci-fi, but Diagnosis Murder is really fun and has Dick Van Dyke in it. So if you like old TV show actors, then you may really love Diagnosis Murder. It's a lot of fun. It's like a procedural drama, but very character driven. Think more like Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote. So he also did the music for Martial Law. He did the music for the TV series Witchblade. Sanctuary was also Joel Goldsmith. And Stargate The Ark of Truth, Stargate Continuum, and the TV series Stargate Universe. So over the years, Joel has really given us a lot, and his father, Jerry, has also given us a lot. It's very much a family tradition of making amazing music for sci-fi, and they collaborated together a lot as well. Brace yourself, because Jerry Goldsmith has probably written a lot of the music to your childhood, no matter how old most of us are at this point. Jerry had a very long career. He was born in 1929 and he passed in 2004. So he was conducting for a very long time. He had worked with Ridley Scott, Steven Spielberg, so many huge directors and producers over the years. Jerry worked with just like everyone who was anyone in sci-fi. So he scored Star Trek The Motion Picture, 4 other films within the Star Trek franchise. He did Planet of the Apes, The Omen. He did Capricorn 1, Alien, Poltergeist, The Secret of Nim, Gremlins, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Air Force One, Mulan, The Mummy, 3 of the Rambo films, and Explorers. In 1997, he released his Universal Studios opening logo and the music that went with it with the release of The Lost World Jurassic Park. And if you've watched any Universal Studios openings of any movie ever, then you know what I'm talking about. He has made such a big impression on my life and on so many different people's lives. For a long time, he worked at CBS and then worked at MGM Studios. So he had also composed music for The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which has David McCallum in it. So he's really been working on these things for such a long time, essentially from the 50s on. So most of us have grown up with his work. Oh my gosh, Jerry has given us so much. I feel my heart swell every time I think about everything that he's done with Alien and everything. His music is so iconic, and him getting to share that with his son, I think, is just really beautiful too. He did the music for Star Trek Voyager. He actually got an Emmy for the main title theme for Star Trek Voyager, which I think is really awesome. Although he collected a lot of awards. He had Emmys, he had Academy Awards. Jerry had a Golden Raspberry Award for the worst original song for Rambo First Blood Part 2. But, rude. He also has, won an award for Gremlins. He won a Saturn Award. So I thought that was really cool too, because those are specifically for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So speculative fiction, really. If there's an award out there, Jerry has won it for music. I'm so impressed with this man, and I highly encourage you guys to look into more of Jerry and Joel Goldsmith's work if you have not become familiar with it yourself at this point. So lastly in our composers, we're going to talk about Danny Elfman. I know we have all seen Danny's name pop up on screen over the years. He's done Batman, he's done Edward Scissorhands, Alice in Wonderland, Dumbo, Spider-Man 2, The Oz, the Great and Powerful. He also did Good Will Hunting and Milk. Men in Black, 50 Shades of Grey, anyone? And also The Nightmare Before Christmas. He did a lot of themes for The Simpsons too. He's done a lot of television themes. So Danny has been a big part of our childhoods. I think that Danny has just, in general, has made so much good music over the years. We would be very hard pressed to list all of Danny and Jerry and Joel's and John Williams' work in, at least 10-minute segment in a podcast. But they have really shaped our lives. Danny also did the music for Flubber, which I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite Robin Williams movies. And it's just fun. He even did the music for Spy Kids. So literally anything from Tim Burton's 2001 Planet of the Apes to Spy Kids to Men in Black 2. He did the music for Big Fish. It's wild what all Danny has really gotten his hands into. The man just loves making music, just like all these other composers, and I really appreciate the contributions they've made to my life and helping me feel, even when I could not emote it, really, over, the past 31 years. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Groundhog Day trope.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
I love Groundhog Day tropes. So in our last segment, we were talking about some of my favorite composers, who may be some of your favorite composers, even if you didn't know their names. John Williams, Joel Goldsmith, Jerry Goldsmith, Danny Elfman. Although, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm fairly certain we all know their names at this point. Now we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite TV tropes, Groundhog Day. I love discussing tropes, and Groundhog Day is one of my all-time favorites. I love a good time loop episode. Most of them are played for humor, but some of them, like the X-Files Monday, are very serious in nature. There's a lot that you can do with it. Also, in Groundhog Day, when they did the movie with Bill Murray, it's both humor and drama. Like, no matter what he does, he can't save that one guy when he finally does start caring about what's going on around him. But a lot of it's also just really funny and character development. I love how it's used. So Groundhog Day, if you're not familiar with the trope, it is the plot in which the character is caught in a time loop doomed to repeat a period of time over and over. Sometimes it's exactly a day. Sometimes, it's 12 hours or 4 hours or something. It just depends on the needs of the show. And usually they're trying to correct something. A lot of times they don't know why they are in this loop and what they necessarily need to correct, but it's a lot of fun, and I like to see the character development as it goes on. So a lot of times the characters will kind of understand what's going on, and they'll get some, like a sense of deja vu about it, but there are other characters who don't really know what's happening at all. And I like just seeing how different shows play that out. In this case, there are several different possibilities for Groundhog Day. So you have tropes, and then you have tropes within tropes. So if everyone and everything else undergoes a complete snapback and nothing else is interfered with, and they will do the exact same things every time, right down to the dialogue, then that's just called a snapback. That is a subgenre of Groundhog Day loops. And that can be a lot of fun too, but they play off of it, and then, the character starts getting used to it, and it's like, oh, how did you know I was going to say that? And it's like, just believe me already. I've been through this like 1,400 times. I like those. Those are just as fun as the odd sense of deja vu. Snapbacks are usually played for humor, but the deja vu subtrope is, more often played for drama, in my experience with the episodes that I have seen. So usually once a character realizes what's going on, one of two things usually happens. They're either going to try to do it the right way at first, or they're going to fight it. And then once the character starts experimenting and playing around, they might confess or act on their feelings for another character, freak out on their boss, start dying in really interesting ways, all that jazz. And when they finally get to the point where they're trying to determine what's caused their loop and, stop it because it's driving them nuts, then they'll use information learned in their previous loops to make sure the next loop goes right. But remember, since everything's resetting, they can't take anything with them. So it forces lazy characters, or characters who are typically deemed to be lazy or not as smart, it puts them in this really interesting position where they're having to carry the knowledge and the intellectual components of the team, if it's team-based or ensemble-based, into the next area. So it really is character growth for those characters as well. There is a common variation on this loop where it's deliberately repeating the same time. So that one's called Set Right What Once Went Wrong. So they fail, and then they just purposely go back in time, repeat it again and again and again. And in those cases, the looper has control of it, and they can stop at any time. If they give up and accept failure, then, they're done. So in those cases, the character really has to care about what's happening. In, a lot of different time loop shows, they just go back one or two times. So Men in Black 3, Jay only goes back the one time, and the bad guy in that one goes back a couple times because he's like, okay, I need to go and change this. But really, because time is fluid, it just depends on how they play that scientific component of it. So technically, the guy who goes back in time feels he's only going back in time once, but because Jay also goes back in time to prevent it, for us, it seems to. So it's, time is relative. So it's on the outside perspective. It's like, you are on a train and you're watching your friend go by who is outside. So they're just standing still watching you go by on the train. And inside the train, you feel like you're not moving yourself, but the train itself is moving. So from the outside perspective of your friend, you are moving. But until you get up yourself and actually start moving, then that is going to be a different experience for you. So space-time is all, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey. But I like to see how different shows approach it. It can be a lot of fun. Groundhog Day loops can also be identified by little odd events that are given full camera focus, but you don't think that they have any significance to the rest of the show. So a lot of times the viewer will get some visual cues, but we tune them out unless we already know that we are in a Groundhog Day episode, and then you start paying attention to a lot of it. I really enjoyed Groundhog Day in general. I think that's probably what really spurred my love of it. I loved the movie with Bill Murray. I just love Bill Murray movies in general, but that one was a lot of fun, and I like how they have done it they've really embraced it in speculative fiction and in sci-fi. It's really fun. They don't really explain it much in the Bill Murray movie. It's just meant to be a plot device at that point to foster character growth and really move the story forward. But it's still it's one of my favorite tropes of all time. And I love that I get to see it so much in my favorite TV shows and my favorite genres. So we are going to go on another break. And when we get back, we are going to discuss some of my favorite time loop episodes from different TV shows.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about the Groundhog Day trope in general, and now we're going to talk about some of my favorite sci-fi Groundhog Day episodes. These are in no particular order, as most of my lists generally are, because it's so hard to really ordinally rank these. They're all amazing in their own right. Some of them are more for comedy, some more for drama, and they're just a lot of fun. In this case, I'm going to start with Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5 episode, Cause and Effect. That was the 18th episode of Season 5, and it actually came out about a year before Groundhog Day, the movie did, which was very interesting. Now, of course, time loops have been in speculative fiction for a long time, and time travel in general. We have the time machine, we have Edward Bellamy's looking backward, where his character travels through time more or less. It's an old plot device. Humans have been interested in space-time for a very long time, since well before we understood anything about it. So while I love the science in sci-fi, I also really love the speculation and speculative fiction. Just the wonderings of what if, what could we do with this? And I think that they did a very great job with it in Cause and Effect. So in that episode, Enterprise gets stuck in a time loop because they clip a warp nacelle, and then they have to relive the same day over and over again. Over time, they start figuring it out. Kelsey Grammer's in it. I love Frasier, so Kelsey Grammer being in it was a big deal for me. He was a big Star Trek fan as well, so it's a lot of fun. I don't want to ruin the episode, but, the characters have to figure out how to escape the time loop, and put their brains together, really work together to get through what is essentially purgatory. You're just stuck in it over and over again. And I tend to view those type of episodes as purgatory. Another favorite of mine is, of course, Stargate SG-1's Window of Opportunity. Window of Opportunity is one of the generally comedic ones. There are some, strong emotional components to it, but essentially Jack and Teal'c are the ones who are stuck in the time loop and everyone else is out of it. And so they just start going through the motions and they're just like, ugh, God, can we just stop with this? Because every time they explain it for the first time, they get a full medical screening and they're shining a light in their eyes and checking them for brain damage with an MRI. And at one point, Jack just says what Sam is about to say in her briefing. And she's like, yeah, corona mass emission. Like, how did you know I was going to say that? And Jack's like, I've been through this before. And Sam's like, maybe you read my report? And Daniel's like, maybe he read your report. Like, it's just common knowledge that Jack does not read reports or anything before these things. He just waits for Sam and Daniel to explain it to him, even though he's the mission commander. At least Jack pretends to do that. I think maybe he could read them, but sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. Probably just the bullet point TLDRs. But that episode is really funny. It's one of the favorites for shippers. It's also one of the favorites for anyone who's trying to get a new person to watch Stargate. So I take two different approaches for that. You can either use the watch list that I proposed in a previous episode, and that's gotten a lot of people who struggled to get through Children of the Gods the first time to really embrace it. And the other method is just start them with Window of Opportunity and then go back to season 1. And once they're already in love with the characters from Window of Opportunity, with all of the crazy golfing through the Stargate and teaching Teal'c to juggle, and Jack and Teal'c learning ancient and Latin as well, so they never really discuss that again. But they spent like 3 months at least trying to get out of this time loop. And we know that because I believe it was the Tok'ra were trying to reach them for 3 months. It was either the Tok'ra or the Asgard. And that was the point where it's like, okay, it was at least 3 months, but we don't know how long we were in here before they started even trying to reach out to us. So it's a minimum of 3 months, because the Earth and the other Stargate where the problem was coming from were connected in like this little bubble. And they were just stuck in this time loop over and over again. And theirs was roughly a day. I think it was about 12 hours or so. And it's used for character growth as well, because Jack is just like, every time I restart this loop, Daniel is asking me a question and I wasn't paying attention the first time. So it gives Jack and Teal'c some perspective. It gives them some character growth. And it's just a lot of fun. Another of my favorites is Dark Matter's All the Time in the World. So 3 wakes up and is stuck in this time loop by himself. He is generally one of the sillier ones, but he's also, he's gruff on the outside, silly on the inside, and just mostly gooey. So if you're familiar with Alan Watts' work, there's goos and prickles and prickly goos and all that jazz. And 3 just, has a hard time opening up and being the real him with a lot of people. And in this case, he's just going through this time loop over and over again until he can fix the problem. And they don't believe him, and they think he's crazy for a lot of the time. But then the android teaches him how to speak French and stuff, and they start a band in French. Because the android doesn't really care. She's like, okay, whatever, and just lets it go. And is the one who really is bonding with him through this. So that's a lot of fun. All the Time in the World is mostly played for comedy, and it's super fun. Another one is Supernatural, Mystery Spot. I'm sure you guys knew that one was coming up. Hey, Tuesday, pig and a poke. And just over and over again, Dean just keeps dying in these totally ridiculous ways. It's so much fun. And there was another early episode. It was from season 3. Kim Manners directed it. Kim also did a lot of work on the X-Files. Some of my favorite episodes that Kim directed of the X-Files included, Signs and Wonders. So the snake handling one. He did a fantastic job with that, and I really enjoy how visually Kim thinks. So he did that one, and Thief, and DPO. Really, he did like 51 episodes, I believe, of The X-Files in directing. And it was just really cool to get to see his work again when he worked on Supernatural. Kim did sadly pass away in 2009, but all of his art continues to live on as well, just like Jerry and Joel Goldsmith's work. Joel passed away in 2012, I believe. So we still can honor them and remember them in watching these fun and silly works that they made, in addition to the more serious dramatic ones. The Supernatural's Mystery Spot, you know, it was a lot of fun too. A lot of us, I think, have already seen that one, and they just go through over and over again with just these silly shenanigans of getting pianos dropped on them and everything. It's super ridiculous, and poor Sam is just horrified that all this is happening to Dean, and Dean just keeps dying in new and more creative ways each time. Which brings me to my honorable mentions. Russian Doll. So I really enjoyed the TV series Russian Doll, but I didn't put it as my favorite episodes per se, because the entire series is about time loops. And, you know, it's very apparent from this series that there's a lot of looping going on. You know that even from the trailer. So it's not spoiling anything, even though it is the entire show. Another honorable mention I would like to bring up is The Magicians. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but they have some excellent time looping in that show, and you guys should really check that out. It's such a fun premise, and the time looping in speculative fiction that is more magic-based than science-based a lot of times also really fascinates me, and it's just as much fun, even if they don't explain it in the same way. But it also makes me think of the Arthur C. Clarke quote that any form of sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So with that thought, I'm going to go ahead and close out the show today. I hope you guys have had fun talking about these things with me, and I'd love to hear from you guys on social media. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly. Have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.